In the heart of Maple Grove, an upscale neighborhood nestled in Riverside County, the sun cast a warm golden glow over manicured lawns and elegant homes that lined the quiet streets. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine, a serene backdrop to what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. Children laughed in the distance, their voices mingling with the soft hum of sprinklers and the occasional chirp of a sparrow. Among them was 7-year-old Isaiah Carter, a small boy with a bright smile and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. Isaiah pedaled his shiny green bicycle along the smooth sidewalks of Maple Street, his favorite blue sneakers flashing with every turn of the wheels. Clutched in his small hands was a worn stuffed lion named Simba, a cherished gift from his late father, who had passed away during a military deployment 2 years prior. Simba was more than a toy to Isaiah. It was a tangible piece of his father's love, a reminder of bedtime stories filled with tales of adventure and promises that his dad was watching over him from the stars. Isaiah's backpack bounced lightly on his shoulders, filled with treasures he'd collected over the past few weeks. Smooth pebbles, a shiny quartz fragment, and a tiny magnifying glass his teacher Mrs. Larson had given him to explore the wonders of the world up close. Isaiah was a dreamer, a boy who saw magic in the ordinary, who believed every rock had a story waiting to be discovered. He wanted to be an explorer one day, maybe even a geologist, uncovering secrets hidden in the Earth's crust, just like his dad had taught him during their walks together, pointing out the beauty in the smallest things. Isaiah's mother, Angela Carter, was the backbone of their little family. At 38, she was the police chief of Riverside County, a position she had earned through years of relentless hard work and determination. As one of the few black women to hold such a role in the county's history, Angela's journey had been anything but easy. She had faced skepticism, prejudice, and countless barriers, but her resilience and commitment to justice had propelled her to the top. Angela was a single mother pouring every ounce of her energy into giving Isaiah the life she never had. She had chosen Maple Grove for its top-rated school district, hoping it would be a place where Isaiah could thrive, make friends, and chase his dreams without the weight of the world's biases pressing down on him. That morning, Angela had walked Isaiah to Maple Grove Elementary, kneeling down to tie his shoelaces and kissing his forehead before he ran off to his first-grade classroom. "Be brave today, my little explorer," she'd said, her voice warm with love. "I'll see you after school." Then she'd driven to the precinct, her mind already shifting to the critical city council meeting later that day, where she would advocate for police reforms to make the system fairer, kinder, and more connected to the community. Angela had no idea that while she fought for justice in a conference room, her son would soon face the very kind of prejudice she dedicated her life to dismantling. Across the street from the Carters' new home at 421 Maple Street lived Margaret Evans, a 46-year-old woman whose life had unraveled in ways she never expected. Margaret had once been a respected figure in Maple Grove, calling herself the neighborhood watch coordinator, though her title was more self-appointed than official. She had lived in the neighborhood for a decade, in a charming house inherited from her parents, its white picket fence, a symbol of the perfect life she once believed she had. But the past year had been brutal. Her husband of 20 years had left her for a younger co-worker, taking with him their shared savings and most of their mutual friends. Then came the layoff from her job as an office manager, a casualty of corporate downsizing. Margaret felt like she was losing control of everything: her marriage, her career, her identity. The one thing she clung to was her neighborhood, her last bastion of order and familiarity. She watched every new resident with a hawk-like intensity, determined to protect Maple Grove from any change that threatened her fragile sense of security. When the Carters moved in 2 weeks earlier, Margaret's unease grew into something darker. She didn't know Angela or Isaiah personally, but she noticed their comings and goings the way they didn't quite fit her image of who belonged in Maple Grove. To Margaret, their presence was a disruption, a challenge to the status quo she desperately needed to preserve. She began keeping a mental log of their routines: when Angela left for work, when Isaiah rode his bike to school, even the delivery drivers who stopped by their house. Margaret told herself she was being vigilant, but deep down, her suspicions were rooted in something uglier, something she wouldn't admit, even to herself. On this particular afternoon, Isaiah felt a surge of excitement as he rode his bike around the block, the wind ruffling his short curls. School had been wonderful that day. He'd made a new friend, Lucas, who shared his love for dinosaurs and promised to show him a fossil collection at recess tomorrow. Isaiah felt like he was finally settling into Maple Grove, like maybe this could be the home his mom had promised, a place where he could belong. He decided to explore a little further than usual, pedaling toward the community mailboxes at the end of Maple Street. That's where he spotted it, a small, shimmering stone half buried in the mulch near the mailbox post. It was smooth, with flecks of mica that caught the sunlight like tiny stars. Isaiah's heart leaped with joy. "Dad would love this one," he whispered to Simba, tucking the lion under his arm as he hopped off his bike. He knelt down, brushing away the dirt to free the stone, his fingers trembling with excitement. He pulled out his magnifying glass, a gift from Mrs. Larson that made everything look like a secret world waiting to be explored. Under the lens, the stone's surface revealed intricate patterns, tiny crystals that sparkled like a galaxy. Isaiah giggled, imagining this rock was a piece of a meteor, maybe even from a planet where dinosaurs still roamed. He was so lost in his discovery that he didn't notice the figure watching him from across the street. Margaret Evans stood at her living room window. Her eyes narrowed as she peered through the blinds. She had been washing dishes when she caught sight of Isaiah kneeling by the mailboxes, his magnifying glass glinting in the sunlight. To Margaret, this wasn't a child exploring. This was something suspicious, something that didn't belong. Her mind raced with assumptions fueled by a mix of fear and resentment. Why was this boy digging around the mailboxes? What was he looking at with that device? Was he planning something? Margaret had been waiting for a reason to act on her unease about the Carters, and this moment felt like the proof she needed. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling not with nervousness, but with a strange sense of righteousness. She stepped outside, her footsteps heavy with purpose, crossing the street toward Isaiah. The boy was still kneeling, oblivious to her approach, his magnifying glass pressed close to the stone as he marveled at its beauty. "What are you doing messing around our mailboxes?" Margaret's voice sliced through the quiet afternoon, sharp and accusatory. Isaiah jumped, nearly dropping his magnifying glass, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked up at the tall woman looming over him, her arms crossed and her face set in a scowl. I found a cool rock," he stammered, holding up the stone with a hopeful smile. "My dad taught me to look for special ones. They have stories, see?" He offered the rock to Margaret, expecting her to share his excitement the way his teacher or his mom always did. But Margaret wasn't interested in stories or childhood wonder. She snatched the rock from Isaiah's hand, her grip tight. "You're not supposed to be here," she said coldly, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Where are your parents? What are you really doing in this neighborhood?" Isaiah's smile faded, replaced by confusion and a growing sense of fear. He didn't understand why this woman was so angry, why she took his rock, why she was looking at him like he'd done something terrible. "It's my rock," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I found it fair and square. I live here at 412 Maple Street." In his nervousness, Isaiah mixed up the numbers. His real address was 421 Maple Street, an innocent mistake for a scared 7-year-old. But to Margaret, this was evidence proof that Isaiah was lying, that he didn't belong. Little boys don't lie about where they live unless they're up to something, she said, her lips curling into a smug smile. First you're digging around our mailboxes, now you're making up stories about where you live. What's your game, kid? Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. He clutched Simba tighter, his small body shrinking under Margaret's harsh gaze. He remembered his mom's safety rules: be polite to adults. Don't argue. Stay calm. But this woman wasn't like the adults he knew. She wasn't kind, like Mrs. Larson, or loving, like his mom. She was scary, and Isaiah didn't know how to make her stop. Margaret pulled out her phone, not to call Isaiah's parents, or to check if he was telling the truth, but to start filming him. I'm documenting suspicious activity in our neighborhood, she announced loudly, as if addressing an invisible audience. Isaiah saw the phone pointed at him, and his fear deepened. Why was she recording him? Was he in trouble? He tried to explain again, his voice shaking. I just wanted to find a rock. My dad said every rock has a story, and I was looking with my magnifying glass. I'm not bad, I promise. But Margaret wasn't listening. She followed him as he climbed back onto his bike, trying to pedal away from her angry words. You're not going anywhere until we figure out what you're up to, she called out. Her voice growing louder, more aggressive. Isaiah pedaled faster, his small legs pumping, but in his panic he lost control. His magnifying glass slipped from his backpack, crashing onto the sidewalk and shattering into pieces. Isaiah stopped, his heart breaking as he looked at the broken glass. It wasn't just a tool, it was a gift, a symbol of his love for discovery, and now it was gone. He knelt down, tears streaming down his face, trying to pick up the pieces. I'm sorry, he whispered. It was an accident. I'll clean it up. But Margaret saw this as more evidence of wrongdoing. Now you're destroying property, she shouted, still filming. First, you're tampering with mailboxes. Then you're lying about where you live. Now, you're breaking things in our neighborhood. Across the street, Mrs. Liu, an elderly woman who tended her rose garden every afternoon, noticed the commotion. She saw Isaiah crying, saw Margaret yelling, and felt a pang of concern. Mrs. Liu had lived in Maple Grove for 20 years and had seen children play in the streets countless times. This didn't look like trouble. It looked like a scared little boy. She put down her watering can and started walking toward them, her steps slow but determined. Little boy, you okay? She asked gently, her voice accented but kind. Isaiah looked up, his tear-streaked face softening at the sight of someone who didn't seem angry. I just found a rock, he said, his voice barely audible. I wasn't doing anything bad. Mrs. Liu's heart ached for him, but before she could say more, Margaret turned on her. Stay out of this, Margaret snapped. This child is causing trouble, and I'm handling it. Mrs. Liu hesitated, intimidated by Margaret's aggression, but unwilling to walk away completely. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson, a father of 2 who lived a few houses down, stepped out to check his mailbox and saw the scene unfolding. He frowned, his instincts telling him something was wrong. He started walking toward them, hoping to understand what was happening. But Margaret waved him off. I've got this under control, she said with authority. This boy doesn't belong here. He's been acting suspiciously, and I'm making sure it's dealt with. Isaiah's world was crumbling. He clutched Simba, his only source of comfort, and tried to make himself small, wishing he could disappear. He didn't understand why this woman hated him, why she wouldn't listen, why she kept saying he didn't belong. He thought of his mom, how she always told him to be brave, but right now he didn't feel brave. He felt alone and terrified. In a desperate attempt to reach her, he pressed the button on his child's smartwatch, the one his mom had given him for emergencies. "Mommy, please come," he whispered, tears falling onto the watch. "There's a scary lady, and I didn't do anything wrong. I just found a rock like Dad taught me." But the watch's screen was blurry through his tears, and he couldn't tell if the call went through. All he knew was that he needed his mom more than ever. Margaret, undeterred, made a decision that would escalate the situation beyond repair. She dialed 911. Her voice shifting from anger to a calculated tone of concern. "I need to report a suspicious child tampering with mailboxes in our neighborhood," she told the dispatcher, emphasizing Isaiah's race in a way that implied it was evidence of wrongdoing. "He's been acting erratically, using some kind of device to examine our property. I think he's up to something, and he doesn't belong here." As she spoke, Isaiah's small frame shook with sobs. His dreams of exploration shattered by the weight of an adult's prejudice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Maple Grove to its core, exposing truths that no one was prepared to face. The peaceful hum of Maple Grove was shattered by the sharp wail of police sirens slicing through the afternoon air. Isaiah Carter, a 7-year-old boy with a tear-streaked face, crouched beside the community mailboxes on Maple Street, his small hands clutching his stuffed lion Simba, as if it could shield him from the nightmare unfolding around him. His green bicycle lay abandoned on the sidewalk, its front wheel still spinning faintly from his panicked attempt to escape. The broken pieces of his magnifying glass glinted in the sunlight, a heartbreaking reminder of the innocent joy that had been stripped away in moments. Margaret Evans stood a few feet away, her arms crossed and her face set in a smug expression of vindication. She had just ended her call to 911, her voice dripping with feigned concern, as she painted Isaiah as a suspicious threat to the neighborhood. To her, this was justice, protecting Maple Grove from an outsider she had already deemed unworthy of belonging. But to Isaiah, the world was collapsing. His small body trembled, his blue sneakers scuffed from scrambling to hide behind a nearby tree. He whispered to Simba, his voice barely audible, "I wasn't bad, Simba. I just wanted to find a rock, like Dad said." The words were a plea, a desperate attempt to make sense of why an adult was treating him like a criminal for doing something as simple as exploring. As the sirens grew louder, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual commotion in their quiet, upscale community. Mrs. Liu, the elderly woman who had tried to comfort Isaiah moments earlier, stood frozen near her rose garden, her watering can forgotten at her feet. Her kind eyes were filled with worry as she watched the little boy shrink further into himself, his tears falling faster now. Mr. Thompson, the father of two who had started to approach earlier, hesitated on his front lawn, his instincts urging him to intervene, but his uncertainty holding him back. Margaret's authoritative tone and the arrival of police cars made him question what he had seen. Was there more to this situation than he realized? Other neighbors, Mrs. Patel, the Johnsons, Mr. Rivera, gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves, their curiosity tinged with unease. Maple Grove was a place where children played freely, where neighbors waved hello, but this scene felt wrong, out of place, like a storm cloud over a sunny day. 3 police cars pulled up to the curb, their red and blue lights casting an eerie glow over the street. Out stepped Officer Daniel Harper, a seasoned veteran with 20 years on the force, known for his no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. Beside him was Officer Laura Bennett, a 10-year officer who prided herself on her ability to read situations quickly and act decisively. Trailing them was Officer Michael Ruiz, a rookie, still finding his footing, eager to prove himself, but cautious about making mistakes. The trio had received Margaret's 911 call through dispatch, a report of a suspicious juvenile tampering with mailboxes and acting erratically in Maple Grove. The call had been flagged as urgent, with Margaret's description painting a picture of potential criminal activity. To the officers, this was a routine response to a citizen's concern. But as they approached the scene, the reality didn't match the report. There, huddled behind a tree, was a tiny boy no older than 7 clutching a stuffed animal and sobbing uncontrollably. His purple backpack lay open beside him, a few rocks spilling out, and the shattered remains of a magnifying glass were scattered on the sidewalk. This was the threat they had been called to investigate. Officer Harper took the lead, his boots heavy on the pavement as he approached Margaret. "Ma'am, are you the caller who reported suspicious activity?" he asked, his tone professional, but tinged with skepticism. Margaret nodded, stepping forward with an air of authority. "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice now a practiced blend of concern and urgency. "This boy has been acting very strangely. I saw him digging around our mailboxes with some kind of device clearly casing the neighborhood. When I confronted him, he couldn't give a straight answer about where he lives, and then he broke that glass and tried to run away." She gestured toward the broken magnifying glass, her words carefully chosen to sound alarming. "I've lived here for 10 years, and we've never had issues like this. I'm worried he's up to something, or maybe he's been left here by someone who's planning trouble." Margaret's story was calculated, each detail designed to reinforce her narrative that Isaiah was a danger, an outsider who didn't belong in Maple Grove. She emphasized his inability to provide a clear address, twisting his innocent mistake, saying 412 Maple Street instead of 421, into evidence of deception. Isaiah heard Margaret's words, and his heart sank deeper into fear. He didn't understand all the big words she used, like casing or erratically, but he knew they made him sound bad. He tried to speak, to explain, but his voice came out in broken sobs. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he managed, his small hands gripping Simba so tightly his knuckles turned pale. "I found a rock. It was shiny, and I looked at it with my magnifying glass. I live here. I promise," but his words were drowned out by his tears, and to Officer Bennett, who was now taking notes, his trembling voice and vague pointing toward his house seemed evasive. She exchanged a glance with Officer Harper, her training kicking in. They had been taught to take all reports seriously, especially in a neighborhood like Maple Grove, where crime was rare, but residents were quick to call for help. "Can you tell us your name and your exact address?" "Son," Officer Bennett asked, her tone firm but not unkind. She knelt slightly to meet Isaiah's eyes, hoping to calm him, but to Isaiah, her uniform and the notepad in her hand were terrifying. He felt like he was in trouble, like he was going to jail, just like the bad guys he saw on TV. "My name is Isaiah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think it's 412 Maple Street, or maybe 421. I got mixed up. I'm sorry." His eyes darted to Margaret, who was watching him with a satisfied smirk, as if his confusion proved her point. Officer Harper raised an eyebrow, jotting down the discrepancy in addresses. To him, this was a red flag. Children who lived in a neighborhood should know their address, especially in a place as safe and structured as Maple Grove. He didn't see a scared little boy. He saw a potential suspect who needed to be questioned further. "All right, Isaiah, we need you to stay right here while we figure this out," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Isaiah nodded, his tears falling faster now, his small body shaking as he hugged Simba closer. His mom wanted her to make this all go away, but he didn't know how to reach her. He tried pressing the button on his smartwatch again, whispering, "Mommy, please, I'm scared." I didn't do anything bad. But the watch wasn't connected properly, and his pleas went unanswered. Officer Ruiz, the rookie, stood a few steps back, his discomfort growing with every passing second. His training had emphasized de-escalation, especially with children, but he was hesitant to challenge his more experienced partners. Still, something about this situation felt wrong. The boy looked terrified, not guilty. The stuffed lion, the broken magnifying glass, the rocks spilling out of his backpack. They didn't scream criminal to Ruiz. They screamed child. He wanted to say something to suggest they call the boy's parents instead of treating him like a suspect, but he held back, unsure if it was his place. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to press her case, her voice growing louder as she sensed the officer's attention. "Officers, I know he looks innocent, but don't let that fool you," she said, her tone almost theatrical. "I caught him in the act using that device to inspect our mailboxes. Then he lied about where he lives, and when I tried to document it, he got upset and broke that glass. He's been acting erratic the whole time. I think he might be lost or abandoned, or maybe someone coached him to come here and cause trouble." She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "This is a good neighborhood. We don't have kids running around unsupervised like this." "Mrs." Liu couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "Officers, please, this boy, not bad," she said, her English halting but sincere. "He just play find rock, look with magnifying glass. He happy, not trouble. I see whole thing from my garden." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth, a direct counter to Margaret's accusations. Isaiah looked at Mrs. Liu, his eyes wide with gratitude, the first spark of hope he'd felt since this ordeal began. Mr. Thompson, emboldened by Mrs. Liu's courage, joined her. "I saw it too," he said, his voice firm. "I was checking my mailbox when this started. The boy was just kneeling by the mulch, looking at a rock. He wasn't tampering with anything. This lady," he gestured toward Margaret, "came out yelling at him, and he got scared. That's why he's crying." The neighbor's words hung in the air, a challenge to Margaret's narrative, but she wasn't about to back down. She turned on them, her face flushed with anger. "You people didn't see the full picture," she snapped. "You're just feeling sorry for him because he's crying. I've been watching him for over an hour, and I know what I saw. He's up to something, and I'm not going to let this neighborhood go downhill because some people are too naive to see the truth." The crowd of neighbors grew larger, drawn by the flashing lights and raised voices. Mrs. Patel, who ran the local bakery, stood with her arms crossed, her brow furrowed. The Johnsons, still in their jogging clothes, whispered to each other, unsure what to make of the situation. Mr. Rivera, a retired teacher, watched from his porch, his heart heavy as he saw Isaiah's fear. The community was divided. Some believed Margaret's authoritative tone, while others felt a growing unease at the sight of a child surrounded by police. Officer Bennett, trying to maintain order, addressed Isaiah again. "Isaiah, can you tell us where your parents are? We need to contact them to sort this out." But Isaiah was too overwhelmed to answer clearly. His mind was a blur of fear and confusion, the officers' uniforms, and Margaret's accusations making him feel like he was trapped in a bad dream. "My mom's at work," he said, his voice breaking. She's the police chief. She helps people. She'd tell you I'm not bad." The officers exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe him. A police chief's son. It seemed unlikely, given the context of the call. Margaret seized the opportunity to cast further doubt. "See? He's making things up now," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "First he lies about his address, now he's claiming his mother is someone important. This is exactly why I called you." Isaiah's sobs grew louder, his small frame shaking as he tried to hide behind the tree again. He pressed his face into Simba, whispering, "I want my mommy. I want to go home." The desperation in his voice cut through the tension, reaching even Officer Ruiz, who finally spoke up. "Maybe we should try to contact his parents before we go any further," he suggested quietly to his partners. "He's just a kid, and he's scared out of his mind." Officer Harper shot him a look, not unkind, but firm. "We need to follow procedure, Ruiz. If he can't verify his address or his story, we have to investigate further. The caller reported suspicious activity, and we can't ignore that." Ruiz nodded, but his unease grew. He glanced at Isaiah, who was now rocking back and forth, his tears soaking Simba's worn fur. The rookie officer felt a knot in his stomach, a sense that they were mishandling this situation, but he didn't know how to change the course. Back at the precinct, Angela Carter was in the middle of a heated city council meeting, her phone on silent as she argued passionately for reforms to make policing more equitable. She spoke about implicit bias training, community outreach, and protocols to protect vulnerable populations, her voice steady despite the resistance from some council members. She had no idea that her own son was at the center of the very kind of injustice she was fighting against. The 911 dispatcher, Maria Gonzalez, a veteran with 15 years of experience, had tried to reach Angela after recognizing the address 421 Maple Street as the home of the police chief. But with no answer, Maria had no choice but to dispatch officers to the scene, hoping the situation wasn't as serious as the caller had made it sound. On Maple Street, the tension was palpable. Margaret stood confidently certain her call had been justified, while Isaiah's world shrank to the size of the tree he hid behind. Mrs. Liu and Mr. Thompson exchanged worried glances, their attempts to defend Isaiah drowned out by Margaret's insistence and the officer's focus on procedure. The neighbors watched, some with sympathy, others with uncertainty, as the scene unfolded like a slow-motion tragedy. Isaiah's small voice broke through again, barely audible. "I'm not a bad kid," he whispered to Simba. "I just wanted to find a treasure." But with the officers closing in and Margaret's accusations ringing in their ears, Isaiah's innocence was being buried under a wave of misunderstanding, and the truth was still far from being heard. The flashing lights of 3 police cars bathed Maple Street in an unsettling glow, their red and blue pulses reflecting off the pristine lawns of Maple Grove. 7-year-old Isaiah Carter sat curled up behind a small tree near the community mailboxes, his tear-soaked face buried in his stuffed lion Simba. His green bicycle lay toppled on the sidewalk, and the shattered remains of his magnifying glass glinted accusingly in the late afternoon sun. Isaiah's small body shook with sobs. His blue sneakers scuffed from his frantic attempt to escape the nightmare that had engulfed his innocent afternoon. Margaret Evans stood a few yards away, her arms crossed and her expression one of smug satisfaction, convinced she had done her duty as the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood. She had called 911, spinning a tale of a suspicious juvenile, tampering with mailboxes, and now 3 officers, Daniel Harper, Laura Bennett, and Michael Ruiz, surrounded the trembling boy, their presence amplifying his fear. To Isaiah, the towering figures in uniform weren't protectors. They were proof he had done something terribly wrong, though he couldn't understand what. "I just found a rock," he whispered to Simba, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to be bad." The crowd of neighbors grew larger, their murmurs a mix of concern and confusion. Lou, the elderly gardener, clutched her hands tightly, her heart aching for the boy she'd tried to comfort. Mr. Thompson, the father who had witnessed the confrontation, stood nearby, his jaw set as he wrestled with his hesitation to intervene more forcefully. The air was thick with tension, a community teetering on the edge of a reckoning no one had anticipated. Officer Harper, the veteran with 20 years of experience, took charge, his notepad open, as he reviewed Margaret's accusations. "Ma'am, let's go over this again," he said, his tone steady but laced with a growing unease. "You said this boy was tampering with mailboxes, using a device and acting erratically." Margaret nodded, her voice unwavering. "Exactly, officer. I saw him kneeling by the mailboxes with some kind of tool, inspecting them like he was planning something. When I asked him where he lived, he gave me the wrong address, 412 instead of 421. Then he broke that glass and tried to run. I've lived here for years, and I know trouble when I see it." Her words were sharp, deliberate, each one painting Isaiah as a threat rather than a child. She leaned in, lowering her voice for effect. "I'm just trying to keep our neighborhood safe. Kids don't act like that unless they're up to no good." Officer Bennett, standing closer to Isaiah, scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. She was trained to take citizen complaints seriously, but something about this scene didn't add up. The boy was tiny, his stuffed lion clutched like a lifeline, his tears genuine. Yet Margaret's confidence and the urgency of the 911 call kept her focused on procedure. "Isaiah," she said, softening her voice slightly, "can you tell us again where your mom is? We need to get in touch with her." Isaiah tried to answer, but his words came out in choked sobs. "She's at work. She's the police chief. She'd say, 'I'm not bad.'" His claim sounded far-fetched to the officers, a child's desperate attempt to avoid trouble. Officer Ruiz, the rookie, shifted uncomfortably, his instincts screaming that this was all wrong. He glanced at Isaiah, whose small frame seemed to shrink further under the weight of the officer's scrutiny. Ruiz wanted to suggest they call the boy's parents immediately, but Harper's authoritative presence and Bennett's focus on protocol silenced him. He noticed Mrs. Liu's distressed expression and Mr. Thompson's clenched fists, signs that the neighbors were starting to question Margaret's story. Mrs. Liu stepped forward again, her voice trembling but resolute. "Officers, please, this boy, not do anything wrong. He find rock look with magnifying glass like little scientist. I see from my garden. He just play." Mr. Thompson nodded, finding his courage. "She's right. I was here the whole time. This lady," he pointed at Margaret, "came out yelling at him for no reason. He was just looking at a rock. She scared him, and that's why he's crying." Margaret's face flushed with anger, her composure cracking. "You're not seeing the full picture," she snapped. "I've been watching him for over an hour. He was sneaking around, and when I confronted him, he lied. You're just sympathizing because he's crying." Her words carried a venomous edge, implying that anyone who defended Isaiah was blind to an obvious threat. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding in support of Mrs. Liu and Mr. Thompson, others unsure, swayed by Margaret's certainty. The crowd grew restless, their whispers turning into murmurs of dissent. Mrs. Patel, the baker, spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "I know this boy. He's new to the neighborhood, lives just down the street. I saw him riding his bike earlier, happy as can be." "This doesn't make sense." Mr. Rivera, the retired teacher, added, "I've seen kids play by those mailboxes for years. They dig in the mulch, pick up sticks. It's what kids do. Why is this boy being treated like a criminal?" The voices of support for Isaiah grew louder, but Margaret doubled down, her voice rising. "You people don't understand. This isn't just about a rock. He was acting suspicious, and I have a right to protect our neighborhood." Her words, laced with prejudice, hung heavy in the air, exposing the root of her accusations. To her, Isaiah's presence, his blackness, was the real issue, a disruption to the maple grove she believed she controlled. The officers caught between Margaret's story and the neighbors' protests felt the pressure mounting. Harper, sensing the situation spiraling, radioed dispatch for more information on the address Isaiah had mentioned, 421 Maple Street. The response came quickly, and the dispatcher's voice crackled through. "That's the residence of Chief Angela Carter. I've been trying to reach her, but she's in a meeting." Harper's face paled slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. The police chief's son. Could it be true? At that moment, miles away at the city council building, Angela Carter sat at a polished conference table, her voice steady as she presented her case for police reform. She spoke passionately about training officers to recognize bias, about building trust with communities, about protecting the most vulnerable children, minorities, those who too often faced unfair scrutiny. Her phone on silent vibrated unnoticed in her bag, racking up missed calls from dispatch. Maria Gonzalez, the 911 dispatcher, had tried repeatedly to reach her, alarmed by the address tied to the call. When Angela's presentation ended, she glanced at her phone and froze. 15 missed calls, an emergency alert police response requested at 421 Maple Street, suspicious juvenile activity. Her heart stopped. That was her home, where she'd left Isaiah that morning with a kiss and a promise to pick him up after school. Her mind raced. Was Isaiah hurt? Was there a break-in? She excused herself abruptly, her voice shaking as she grabbed her bag and ran to her car, her heels clicking against the pavement. She sped toward Maple Grove, her hands gripping the steering wheel, fear and fury battling within her. As a Black mother, she knew the stories of children targeted for their skin color, but she never imagined it would happen to her son in their own neighborhood under her watch as police chief. As Angela's car turned onto Maple Street, the scene hit her like a physical blow. 3 police cars, their lights flashing. A crowd of neighbors, some shouting, others watching in silence. And in the center, her son, her Isaiah, curled up on the ground, sobbing, surrounded by 3 uniformed officers. His purple backpack was open rocks scattered around him, and his stuffed lion was clutched so tightly it looked like it might tear. Angela slammed her car door and ran toward him, her heart breaking with every step. "Isaiah!" She called, her voice a mix of desperation and love. "Mommy's here, baby." Isaiah's head snapped up, his tear-filled eyes finding his mother's face. "Mommy!" He screamed, scrambling to his feet and running toward her, his small legs moving as fast as they could. He threw himself into her arms, his sobs shaking his entire body. "I wasn't bad, Mommy. I promise. I just found a rock, like Dad taught me," she said. "I don't belong here." Angela held him tightly, kissing his forehead, her own eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "You're not bad, baby," she whispered, her voice fierce with love. "You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy's got you now." The officers froze their faces, registering shock as they watched the reunion. Officer Harper, the veteran, was the first to speak, his voice cautious. "Ma'am, are you this boy's mother?" Angela stood, lifting Isaiah into her arms, her gaze locking onto Harper's with an intensity that made him step back. "I'm Chief Angela Carter," she said, her voice steady but laced with controlled fury. "This is my son, Isaiah Carter, and I want to know exactly why 3 of my officers are surrounding my 7-year-old child in our own neighborhood." The words hit like a thunderclap. Officer Bennett's pen stopped mid-sentence, her face paling. Officer Ruiz's mouth opened, then closed, his earlier unease now fully validated. The crowd gasped, whispers rippling through the neighbors. The police chief's son, Margaret's satisfied expression vanished, replaced by a look of pure horror. She stammered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. I thought he was..." He was acting suspicious. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." Her words trailed off hollow and unconvincing as the truth began to dawn on everyone. "Mrs." Leo stepped forward, holding the broken pieces of Isaiah's magnifying glass, her hands shaking with emotion. "Chief Carter, your boy, he good boy. He find rock use this to look. He not bad. This lady," she pointed at Margaret, "she yell, scare him. He cry because she mean." Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice steady. "I saw it all, Chief. Your son was just playing, looking at a rock with his magnifying glass. This woman came out of nowhere, accusing him of things he didn't do. She took his rock, filmed him, made him feel like a criminal." The neighbors' voices grew louder, a chorus of support for Isaiah. Mrs. Patel spoke up again. "I've seen Isaiah riding his bike every day. He's a sweet kid, always waving hello." "This is outrageous." Mr. Rivera added, "We let this happen in our neighborhood. We should have stopped it sooner." Margaret's face reddened, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the community's judgment. She tried to defend herself, but her words sounded desperate. "I was just being cautious. You don't understand what I saw. He didn't belong here." The last sentence slipped out raw and revealing, and the crowd fell silent, her prejudice laid bare for all to see. Angela's eyes locked onto Margaret, her fury tempered by years of discipline as a leader. She held Isaiah close, feeling his small body relax slightly in her arms, but her voice carried the weight of authority. "Officers, I want a full report on this incident by end of day," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want to know how a call about a child collecting rocks escalated to 3 patrol cars surrounding my son, and I want to know why my officers didn't question a narrative that clearly didn't match what they saw." Harper nodded, his face grim. "Yes, Chief. We'll have it ready." Bennett looked down, guilt etching her features, while Ruiz, the rookie, felt a mix of relief and shame. He had wanted to speak up, but hadn't. Angela turned to Margaret, her gaze piercing. "You called the police on a 7-year-old for playing in his own neighborhood. You lied about his actions, exaggerated a harmless moment, and traumatized my child. There will be consequences for this." Margaret shrank back, her bravado gone, her eyes darting to the neighbors, who now looked at her with disgust. Isaiah clung to his mother, his sobs quieting as her presence grounded him. "Mommy, she took my rock," he whispered, his voice small but steady. Angela knelt, wiping his tears. "We'll get it back, baby. And we'll find more rocks just like Dad taught you." She reached into his backpack and pulled out the shiny stone he'd found, holding it up to the light. "This is a beautiful treasure, Isaiah. You did nothing wrong." The crowd watched this tender moment, their hearts heavy with the realization of what had happened. A child's innocence had been threatened not by a crime, but by one woman's prejudice, and a system that had failed to question it. The truth was out, and Maple Grove would never be the same. Angela stood holding Isaiah's hand, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about her son, it was about every child who faced suspicion for simply existing. As she led Isaiah toward their home, the neighbors parted, some offering quiet apologies, others vowing to do better. Margaret stood alone, the weight of her actions settling over her like a shadow, while the community faced a moment of reckoning that would demand change. The sun hung low over Maple Grove, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns as the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual quiet. The police cars had left their flashing lights, no longer painting Maple Street in hues of red and blue. The crowd of neighbors had dispersed, some retreating to their homes with heavy hearts, others lingering in small groups whispering about the incident that had shaken their community to its core. Chief Angela Carter stood on the porch of her home at 421 Maple Street, her arm wrapped protectively around her 7-year-old son Isaiah, who clutched his stuffed lion Simba and the shiny rock he'd found earlier that day. The tears had dried on Isaiah's face, but his eyes still held a flicker of fear, a reminder of the trauma inflicted by Margaret Evans's false accusations and the overwhelming presence of 3 police officers. Angela's face was a mask of calm determination, but inside a storm of emotions raged fury at the injustice her son had endured, heartbreak for his lost innocence, and a fierce resolve to ensure this would never happen again. The truth had been laid bare. Margaret had called the police on a child for collecting rocks driven by prejudice that saw Isaiah's blackness as a threat. Now, as the dust settled, Maple Grove faced a reckoning, and Angela was determined to turn this painful moment into a catalyst for change. Inside their cozy living room, Angela knelt beside Isaiah, brushing a hand through his curls. "You're safe now, baby," she said softly, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "You did nothing wrong. That lady was wrong to scare you, and Mommy's going to make sure this doesn't happen to any other kid." Isaiah looked up, his eyes wide with trust. "She took my rock." "Mommy?" he said, his voice small. "And my magnifying glass broke." Angela's heart clenched, but she forced a smile. "We'll get you a new magnifying glass, and that rock is yours. You found it fair and square, just like Dad taught you." She handed him the shiny stone, its mica flecks catching the light. Isaiah's face lit up, a spark of his usual wonder returning. "It's like a star, right?" he asked, holding it close. "Like Dad's watching me," Angela nodded, her throat tight. "Exactly, baby. Dad's always watching, and he's so proud of you." She hugged him tightly, vowing silently to protect his curiosity, his joy, his right to be a child in a world that too often judged him before knowing him. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with a mix of shame and determination. Mrs. Liu, the elderly gardener who had defended Isaiah, sat in her kitchen, her hands trembling as she thought of the terrified boy. She couldn't shake the image of his tear-streaked face, and by evening she made a decision. She drove to a nearby store and bought a new magnifying glass, its handle bright blue, Isaiah's favorite color. The next morning, she knocked on the Carter's door, a small gift bag in hand. When Angela answered, Mrs. Liu handed her the bag, her eyes shining. "For your boy?" she said in her careful English. "He little scientist. He should keep looking for treasures." Inside was a note. "To Isaiah, keep exploring the world. You belong here." Angela's eyes welled up as she thanked Mrs. Liu, who waved off her gratitude with a shy smile. "We all learn today," Mrs. Liu said. "We do better now." The gesture was small, but profound, a step toward healing the wound inflicted on Isaiah and the community. Mr. Thompson, the father who had witnessed the confrontation, couldn't sleep that night. The image of Isaiah surrounded by police haunted him, as did his own hesitation to intervene sooner. He felt complicit, not because he shared Margaret's prejudice, but because he hadn't acted quickly enough to protect a child. The next day, he called a neighborhood meeting, sending out emails and knocking on doors. "We need to talk about what happened," he told his neighbors. "We let a little boy down, and we have to make sure it never happens again." The meeting was set for the weekend at the community center, and to his surprise, nearly every household showed up. Mrs. Patel, the baker, brought cookies shaped like stars, a nod to Isaiah's love for treasures. Mr. Rivera, the retired teacher, shared stories of students he'd seen unfairly judged over the years, urging the group to confront their biases. The Johnsons, usually reserved, spoke about teaching their own kids to stand up against unfair treatment. The room buzzed with a shared commitment to change, a recognition that Maple Grove had failed Isaiah and needed to rebuild itself into a place where every child felt safe. Margaret Evans, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her actions. Angela, as police chief, filed charges for filing a false police report, a serious offense that carried legal penalties and public shame. The Neighborhood Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting, voting unanimously to remove Margaret from her self-proclaimed role as watch coordinator. But the true punishment came from her neighbors. People who once nodded politely at her now avoided her gaze. Parents steered their children away from her house. The community she had claimed to protect turned its back on her, seeing her not as a guardian, but as someone who had endangered a child with her prejudice. Margaret sat alone in her living room, the blinds drawn, her phone silent. The isolation was suffocating, a mirror to the emptiness she'd felt since her divorce and job loss. But this time, it was her own actions that had built the walls around her. She had weaponized her fear and bias against a 7-year-old, and now she faced the reality that her hatred had destroyed her, standing in Maple Grove, more effectively than any outside threat ever could. At the police precinct, Angela wasted no time turning the incident into a catalyst for reform. She gathered her officers, Harper Bennett Ruiz, and the entire department for an emergency briefing. Her voice was calm but unyielding as she addressed them. "What happened to my son yesterday is a failure of our system," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "You responded to a call about a suspicious juvenile and found a crying 7-year-old with a stuffed animal. Your training should have told you to question the narrative, to de-escalate, to see the child, not the accusation." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory retraining on community policing with a focus on recognizing racially motivated calls and protecting children. We're also establishing protocols to evaluate 911 reports for bias before dispatching officers. No child should ever feel like a criminal in their own neighborhood." Officer Ruiz, the rookie, spoke up, his voice shaky but sincere. "Chief, I felt something was wrong, but I didn't speak up. I'm sorry. I'll do better." Angela nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Your instincts were right, Officer Ruiz. Trust them next time. Good policing means having the courage to question what doesn't feel right." The department's changes rippled outward. Angela organized community forums, inviting residents to learn about appropriate use of emergency services and the impact of bias-driven calls. She shared Isaiah's story, not just as his mother, but as a leader committed to building trust between police and the community. "My son was targeted for being Black in a neighborhood where someone decided he didn't belong," she told a packed town hall. "We must do better police, neighbors, all of us. We protect our children by seeing them for who they are, not what fear tells us they might be." The forums sparked honest conversations with residents admitting their own blind spots and pledging to intervene when they saw unfair treatment. Maple Grove began to transform not just in policy, but in spirit. Families who once kept to themselves started organizing playdates, block parties, and community cleanups. Parents taught their children that every kid in the neighborhood belonged, no matter their background. Isaiah, once shy, found himself surrounded by new friends, Lucas, Emma, Sophia, who brought him rocks they'd found, eager to join his treasure hunts. Isaiah's resilience shone through like the mica in his favorite rock. With his new magnifying glass from Mrs. Liu, he returned to exploring his curiosity, undimmed by the trauma he'd faced. One sunny afternoon, he sat in his front yard, his rock collection spread out on a blanket, showing his friends the patterns he'd discovered. "This one looks like a river," he said, holding up a smooth stone. "And this one's like a star from Dad's sky." Angela watched from the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, her heart swelling with pride. Her son had not only survived, but thrived his spirit, a testament to the love and support that surrounded him. His rock collection became a neighborhood treasure, a symbol of childhood wonder that Maple Grove had learned to protect. Other children joined him, bringing their own rocks, and soon the front yard was a hub of laughter and discovery. Angela thought of her late husband who had taught Isaiah to see stories in stones and made a silent promise to him she would keep fighting for a world where their son and every child could explore without fear. The lessons from that day were profound, etched into the fabric of Maple Grove and beyond. For the community, it was a wake-up call to confront prejudice, to question assumptions, and to act when injustice unfolded before them. Neighbors learned that silence could enable harm, and that speaking up like Mrs. Liu and Mr. Thompson had was a powerful act of courage. For the police department, it was a reminder to prioritize humanity over protocol, to see the person behind the report, and to challenge narratives that didn't align with what they saw. For Isaiah, it was a lesson in resilience, in knowing his worth despite others' judgments. And for Angela, it was a renewed commitment to her mission as a mother and a leader to dismantle systems that failed the vulnerable and to build communities where love and fairness prevailed. The incident had exposed the ugliness of bias, but also the power of collective action to right wrongs. Maple Grove became a place where children played freely, where neighbors looked out for one another, and where the innocence of a boy collecting rocks was celebrated, not criminalized. Educational takeaway. The story of Isaiah Carter teaches us that prejudice can turn an innocent moment into a nightmare, but it also shows the power of community courage and accountability to create change. We must recognize and challenge our biases, ensuring that every child is seen for their potential, not judged by their appearance. Protecting innocence means speaking up against injustice, fostering empathy, and building inclusive communities where everyone belongs. By learning from mistakes like those made on Maple Street, we can create a world where children like Isaiah can explore, dream, and thrive without fear.